many landowners and farmers and ranchers in Alberta in disputes with oil companies. But I've also, much of my practice has been focused on helping people when governments, in their mind, has gone too far, affecting their life or their business or their livelihood. And so I've done a lot of judicial review and administrative law and tribunal work.
Thank you. And have you, I take it you've appeared before all levels of Alberta courts and many regulatory tribunals?
That's right.
And can I ask the clerk to bring up WTS 6058? You attended an interview with me and my colleagues on October 2022?
That's correct.
And you were provided with a draft summary that was prepared by Commission Counsel.
That's right.
And you had an opportunity to review that summary, comment on it, and then you were provided with an amended version, which you also reviewed.
That's right.
And I'm showing you on the screen what we've, an interview summary. You recognize this as your interview summary?
I do.
And do you have any changes or corrections you want to make this morning?
No, other than, as we've heard from so many witnesses, there were so many events occurring, and it was some time ago, but to the best of my recollection, this is accurate.
Thank you.
If I can just interrupt, you have a tendency to speak rapidly, so if you could try and moderate it, that would be helpful. It's for the interpreters, obviously.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And I'll be referring to your interview summary from time to time, but if at any time you need to refer to it, you just let me know and we can bring it up.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you some questions about how you became involved with the Freedom Convoy. I understand that you were contacted by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms on February 1, 2022.
Yes.
And at that time, you were acting on another matter through the JCCF.
That's correct.
And what was that retainer?
What happened was in the fall of 2021, my wife, who is a retired nurse, we've been married forever and have 4 kids, and she became very concerned about what she was seeing in terms of government policy, health policy. Felt that things were badly going awry, and she did something she's never done before, where she encouraged me to get involved and take a case. She's normally the gatekeeper because I tend to take too many cases. And Ms. Chipiuk, who I'd practiced law with in the past in other cases, approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to take a case at the Justice Center. They needed senior litigation counsel. I agreed. They told me I could pick whichever case I would like, and I'd been studying the travel mandates, and I thought they were ultra vires, the Aeronautics Act, and and also obviously breaching charter. And so I agreed to lead that case with former Premier Brian Peckford as our lead applicant.
And that case is still going on?
We just got struck on mootness, and we're appealing that to the Federal Court of Appeal.
And when was that?
We got struck not last Thursday, the Thursday before, while I was here. And then that led to, on the 1st of February, I had a legal team meeting set up, noticed some extra people in the Zoom room, and let them in. And I was informed by one of the lawyers who I'd met for the first time on that Zoom call that the truckers in Ottawa that morning had reached out to the Justice Center and asked the Justice Center if they would provide legal support. The lawyers on the call told me that they'd assembled a team and they'd asked me if I would come to Ottawa the next morning and lead that team. And I agreed.
You were able to clear your schedule that quickly?
Well, I got spousal consent very quickly, so that helped tremendously. And yeah, I was.
Now, you say there was a team of 4 lawyers, I believe, in your statement?
That's right.
And who was on that team?
Eva Chipiak,
Yes?
Andre Murmur, Tim Turple, and Allison Pechovic.
And had you been following the news about what was happening in Ottawa?
Yeah, I was very fascinated with how the convoy started to form. I was amazed at the rate at which the donations were coming in, just from following social media and the legacy media as well. And I thought, I want to really keep an, this is prior to February 1st, of course. And I thought, well, I really want to keep an eye on this. And I realized probably the easiest way to do that would to be make a nominal donation, and then I would get the email updates. So I donated $15, a little embarrassed about that, but just for the purpose of tracking and getting the regular email updates. I had no idea that a few days after I made that donation that I would be in downtown Ottawa.
And on a personal level, did you have a view of what was happening in Ottawa?
Well, I had a view. I think there's 2 questions there. Obviously, I had grave concerns about the government's policies and the harm that I'd witnessed in my own family with our children, with my neighbors, with my friends, with my colleagues. So in that context, I have a very strong view that I think tremendous mistakes were made at a policy level. But with respect to the convoy, I felt that it was providing an opportunity for people who are also concerned to symbolize that concern and demonstrate it.
And at that point in time, what did you understand your retainer to be?
My instructions were to work with the leadership group to provide on-the-ground legal support. One of the things that we thought we would likely be doing, which we didn't end up having to do, was to obtain an injunction. We anticipated that we would have to defend injunctions, provide legal advice as to the types of activities that they're allowed to do and the things they're not allowed to do. Also, it was clear at that time, if you recall, I apologize if I'm talking too fast again, sir. If you recall that around that time, GoFundMe had publicly announced a suspension of the fundraising campaign. I was also told at the time of being engaged that work was underway to set up a not-for-profit corporation, Canada Corp, to ensure a proper organizational structure for the administration of the donations. Something else that I've done in my background that proved to be extremely useful, not only in Ottawa, but in the events since, is I've represented not-for-profit groups, and I've represented various industry organizations, so I've dealt with conflicts and strong personalities on boards of directors and seen the interpersonal quarrels that can arise. And some of the groups that I've represented have been comprised of independent ranchers. And upon arriving in Ottawa, I immediately realized this personality similarities between independent Alberta ranchers and independent truckers. So that's some context.
Okay, so the next day, February 2nd, you went to Ottawa, and I understand you went on a private aircraft?
Yes, it was a small, bumpy, I forget the name of it, but it's a twin prop. And we left at 8 a.m. We left at 8 a.m. on that February 2nd, and we landed in Ottawa at about 10:30. So it was not a luxury experience. We went up and down many times. We stopped in Medicine Hat. We stopped in Regina, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and then Thunder Bay. All the stops were to pick up additional lawyers and the accountant, or the last one to get fuel.
Now, at the time, did you consider, did you wonder, given the nature of your retainer, why you were being flown on a private aircraft?
Because at that time, the understanding of the interim orders under the Aeronautics Act is that it did not extend to private charter aircraft. And some of the passengers on that aircraft were unvaccinated. So that was a way for us to get to Ottawa quickly under the interim order.
And did you know at the time who was paying for the aircraft?
There was confusion about that, in the same way that there was confusion about, there was two other groups that had allegedly made arrangements for us to have hotel rooms when we arrived. And so the Justice Center made a backup plan to have a third hotel ready, and that's the one we ended up using. As we were boarding the plane, whoever was supposedly going to be paying for this charter turned out they weren't going to pay for the charter. And the Justice Center made the decision to send us anyway, and if necessary, they would pay for the charter if who had originally said they were going to pay for it didn't.
And do you know who ultimately paid for the charter?
I believe it was and I'm not certain about this, but I believe it was paid from funds donated through Chris Guerra's Adopt a Trucker.
Thank you. Now, you heard yesterday Ms. Belton's evidence about a conversation she had with you regarding disclosure of this flight?
Disclosure of, sorry?
Information about this flight?
Okay.
I believe she said she was told not to say anything about it?
No, that's not correct.
What do you have to say about that?
I had no discussion with Ms. Belton about this flight. I had no concerns about the flight. I'm double vaccinated. It wouldn't have mattered what aircraft I was on.
Okay. Now, I'd like to just pause here for a moment. I know that at this point you're acting as a lawyer, and to the extent that any of my questions would require you to disclose privilege information where privilege has not been waived, would you tell me and not answer?
I will, and just so everyone's clear, I do, in July, my clients instructed me to consider making myself available as a witness, and granted a waiver with respect to these matters, this proceeding, and we've subsequently confirmed it in writing to avoid any confusion that I am here today with a waiver from my clients with respect to solicitor-client privilege. And
when you say your clients, who did you include in that?
The clients include Freedom Corp, so that's their short name for the full legal name of the not-for-profit. It includes Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, Danny Bulford, Tom Marazzo, Sean Thiessen, Miranda Gracer, Joe Jantz, Dale Enns, and Ryan Mihilowicz, and I believe that's the full list.
I understand that during the period we're about to talk to, you were also dealing with Chad Eros.
That's correct.
Was he part of your client group?
He was offered an opportunity to become a client and did not sign a retainer agreement.
Well, my understanding is his position is he was a client and that he has not waived privilege.
That's fine, and out of an abundance of caution, we can respect that. I do know that the absence of a retainer was confirmed by him in writing, so, to me.
And if at any time you're in doubt about privilege and you need time to consult with Mr. Miller, you'll just let me know.
I absolutely will, thank you.
Now, so you arrived in Ottawa then with the group in the evening of February 2nd?
That's correct.
And understand you rented a car and went to the Ark Hotel.
Yeah, there was, I was in a taxi with Dwayne, and I can't recall specifically who else was with me. And then the others rented a car. So there was, we had two modes of getting there, and the decision was to get me and Dwayne downtown as quick as possible because we had so little time to deal with whatever we anticipated coming. While we were on the plane, we received a briefing on and reviewed the emails from GoFundMe, which are in the record here, setting out all of their concerns. And then we drafted during that flight a substantive, I think, 4 or 5 pages addressing each of the issues that GoFundMe had raised. So we were working on that flight. We wanted to get downtown to meet the clients, sign retainer agreements, and brief them and give them an opportunity to review that letter to GoFundMe so we could get it to GoFundMe as soon as possible.
Okay. And you went to the Ark Hotel, am I right?
That's correct.
And that's downtown Ottawa, Slater and Metcalfe, I believe.
Yep. The vehicle we were in drove right up to the front door of the hotel, just like.
And when you got to the Ark Hotel, understand you met with Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, and was there anybody else there?
Yeah, Miranda Gracer was there. Sean Thiessen was there. And I believe that's it. There might have been 1 or 2 other people in the room, but that's the best of my recollection.
And had you met any of these people before?
No, never.
Had you at any time heard about Ms. Leach?
Yes, I heard about her, but only in the context of the Freedom Convoy. Anything else I learned about Miss Leach, I'm pretty sure I Googled her as starting to watch the convoy form. So this would be in, late January, to try and understand who she was. But I've had no prior dealings with her or awareness of who she was or what she was engaged in until I Googled her because of the convoy.
Okay. And about what time did you arrive at the hotel?
My memory is it was about 11:30 at night.
Okay. And could you tell the commissioner what happened at that point in brief?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, we drove through the downtown, so that was my first chance to see where all the trucks and the protest vehicles were and all the signage and so on. And how you could still drive around. There was always one lane open. That's how we got right to the hotel. When I walked into the lobby, I could really feel the tension. There was truckers everywhere. There was supplies stacked and piled everywhere. And the tension was, I could really feel the tension.
So can we come to the meeting that you had your prospective, at that time, prospective clients? So you said did you finalize your retainer at that point?
Yes. Andre Murmur had the paperwork and had them sign.
And did the nature of your retainer differ from what you told us about what your understanding was about it?
Well, and I should clarify one thing, that the way the Justice Center operated at that time, the retainer has their name on it, the Justice Center, as the legal provider. Was the retainer different? No. At the nature of my anticipated involvement remained constant.
And I take it you then proceeded to get to know your clients?
Yeah.
How long did that evening meeting last? You got there at 11:30. When did it end?
Not that long. Everybody was exhausted. We had just had, landing and taking off several times in a small aircraft is a little bit hard on the body. And not to mention, I had I'm sure all of the people on our team were the same. This happened so fast, we had very, very little sleep. We could tell the fatigue, and that was when I first was informed that Tamara was aware that some group was calling a press conference for the next day, and they wanted her to speak. And I immediately started asking questions about, okay, who's called the press conference? What's its purpose? Who all speaking? Was there a media advisory? She didn't know, this is not her world. I've dealt with high-profile cases and communication specialists extensively, so she didn't even know what a media advisory was.
Okay, and I understand wrote out her remarks for her?
Well, what happened was I had no intention of being in the media. I was there to not be in the media, but to provide guidance. And even in that first meeting, I started hearing these different groups' names, and I was, okay, well, who is this group, and why are they here, and what, this other group? It was the chessboard was starting to, the fog was starting to lift, and I was sort of, oh boy, this is going to get complicated. The major concern I had was two things. Tamara made it clear to me that she did not feel comfortable. Appreciate she's absolutely exhausted. They all were. I could see the fatigue. And she didn't feel comfortable being exposed to a long format press conference where every media person could come at her, basically. And so I was already giving some thought as to how we could possibly restructure the press conference to make it more orderly and make it more effective in conveying some information that I thought the public and the world wanted to hear.
So, and you did you prepare her remarks for her?
So the next morning, my legal team was adamant that I should take a more active role in the press conference. I was initially reluctant. When we got from our hotel, which was out of the downtown, to the Arc and went into one of the logistics rooms on the main floor, it's a big boardroom, I got more information about the plan for the press conference, and that was, it was going to include a number of medical doctors. And
Sir, my question was just whether you prepared her remarks, Tamara Litch's remarks for her. There
was, Take Back Our Freedoms had a external communication consulting firm that had prepared a speech for her. A number of us, including Tamara Leach, reviewed it, did not like the messaging. So Ms. Chipiuk and another individual, a medical doctor, rewrote it. It still wasn't in Ms. Leach's voice, so I assisted Ms. Leach in revising that statement, and it was finalized in very short order because we only had less than an hour, and then she proceeded to the press conference to deliver it.
And Mr. Clerk, can I ask you to bring up JCF 50155? It's a video. And I'd just like to play 1 minute from that.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Keith Wilson. I'm a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. As some of you may know, there was an announcement earlier today that the Justice Center and a team of lawyers are here on the ground in Ottawa to assist the truckers and the Freedom Convoy 2022 with whatever legal needs they might have. What we're going to do today in this brief press conference is you're going to hear from Tamara Leach, who we all know is the spark that lit this fire and the leader of this organization. You're also going to hear from Joanie Pelche, who is going to summarize in French what Tamara says.
Okay, can I ask you to
And
stop
then-
it there, please? You say that Ms. Leach was the spark that lit this fire. Who told you that?
That no one told me that.
Where did it come from?
My brain.
Okay. And how did your brain figure that out?
Well, I observed what was happening, and I noticed that this is again prior to me being engaged, that she seemed to be the organic leader. She was the one that was doing the Facebooks, lives and other videos. She was the one who was sending out the message, and she seemed to have the personality of a natural leader that inspired others to get behind her.
Thank you. Now, can you bring up, Mr. Clerk, HRF 40139? And this is a letter to GoFundMe that I think dated February 3rd, and that's the letter you told us was drafted on the plane, correct?
That's correct.
And just if you can scroll up, please, a little more. You note at the bottom there, you set out your understanding of the evolving goals of the committee's GoFundMe campaign.
Yes.
And if you can just scroll up, I won't read them, but that's what you understood to be the goals.
Just one moment. Yes.
And if you can just scroll up a little more, stop there. The paragraph beginning, "Everyone has been surprised." You say the last sentence there, "The truckers have been open with the media that they are not leaving until the government vaccine mandates are lifted." Who on the plane provided that information?
I think it might have been either in some of the drafts that Mr. Eros had prepared, and understand that we did a draft on the plane. So that would have been the, is that the Wednesday night? Anyway, the February 2nd. Then we had the letter reviewed by the clients, and then the letter the next morning was reviewed by the Finance Committee back in Alberta, and a number of people requested, as normally occurs if you circulate a draft, that words and sentences be added. So I don't know exactly whether that arose in the very first draft, or whether that was something that some of the leaders in Ottawa had added, or whether that was something that the Finance Committee wanted added.
And can you just scroll up a little more, please? You note in the second bolded paragraphs that the intention is not to reimburse those committing unlawful acts or criminal acts, and you say the convoy has been clear, it only supports peaceful assembly. At this point in time, I take it you were aware that there were some officials that were suggesting that some of the conduct going on was unlawful?
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot. And what I've always struggled with is at what point in time Did those officials believe it became an unlawful assembly, and on what basis? Because it just seemed to be a terminology that started to morph and become adopted with no particular triggering event or explanation as to what that individual or official thought constituted an unlawful assembly.
And later that day, you attended a phone meeting with GoFundMe,
That's correct.
and among other people,
That would have been on the, that would have been on the Thursday afternoon.
yeah, and among other people, Mr. Eros was on that call.
Yeah, all of the lawyers that were with me and a number of the board members from Freedom Corp were there, as well as Ms. Leach.
And Mr. Clerk, can you bring up WTS 6032 and go to page 8? This is a witness statement provided by Chad Eros. And he made certain statements in there, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Sure.
On page 8, he says that the, if you can scroll up. A little more, please. I'm not seeing it right now, but he does say that the JCCF lawyers, and specifically you, were trying to take over the meeting and assert themselves as the spokespeople on the financial side of the convoy. Do you remember reading that?
I don't remember reading that.
Right there, and where it says Mr. Wilson trying to take over the meeting. All I want to know is whether you want to respond to that.
Well, I mean, what does that mean? When I led the meeting, someone needs to lead a meeting from when you have two parties. Mr. Eros spoke, other lawyers spoke. Mr. Eros spoke extensively in explaining to the GoFundMe executives and their legal team, because I would estimate by memory, there was 10 to 12 people from GoFundMe on the other side of the conference call. This was a call, not a Zoom.
Yeah. And you mentioned, sorry.
And we relied heavily, at least our side, on Mr. Eros explaining the financial controls and who he was and his background in banking and as a CPA and his role as treasurer. But yes, I did lead the discussion. That is true.
And I understand as well that you had some discussions with Mr. Eros about the organization Take Back Our Freedoms.
Yes.
Did Ms. Leach have some concerns about that organization?
Yes.
And what were those concerns?
My memory is, as I indicated in my witness statement, and it wasn't just Take Back Our Freedoms, this was happening extensively, and it happened immediately, or I observed it immediately after the first day when I actually started to, appreciate I'm coming in at night and go through the lobby and up to a hotel room and then back out. The next day, I'm now starting to interact more, and I'm now in a big boardroom, and there's these different people coming and going, and I'm trying to figure out who's who. There was no organization chart. There was no introduction session. It's not even like a meeting where you go around the table and introduce one another. That didn't happen. It was constant chaos. So I learned that there was a group, and then I learned that it was this TBOF. I didn't even know what TBOF meant initially. And then I'd heard about this Canada Unity. And then there was Mr. Bourgel's group, Something for Freedom. Then there was Veterans for Freedom. I could go on. There were so many different groups I was starting to learn of. And what I observed was that different groups were trying to take control. And what I observed and believed to be true is that some were trying to take control because they saw the organic, flat hierarchy largely of the convoy and wanted to make it more successful and felt they had the organizational capability to do that. Other groups seem to want to reshape the Freedom Convoy into their own event, branded theirs. And I got the distinct impression from some others that they were trying to get their hands on what at that point was $10 million in donations. And my impression and my recollection from the discussions that I would have with Ms. Leach, as various people would demand private meetings or, play games and say we weren't allowed to use the boardroom because it was their boardroom, those sorts of things, that she was under pressure from a lot of these different groups for the reasons I've given.
Okay, and coming back to take back our freedoms, am I correct that Mr. Peckford was the chairman of that organization?
Yeah, and it's interesting because he's more of a symbolic chairman. In all of my discussions with the Honorable Brian Peckford, I would speak with him not every evening, but maybe every second or third evening. My telephone logs confirm that I've tendered in evidence. And I was looking for guidance from him. He was, he's an elder statesman. He's been through a lot. He's one of our founding fathers of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, very seasoned politician. And so at no time did we ever have any discussion around Take Back Our Freedoms. Did I feel he was speaking on their behalf? Him and I become somewhat close through my work on his federal travel mandate charter challenge in federal court. And I was using him as a resource and someone to run ideas past and get guidance from.
And am I correct that you were aware that at least Mr. Eros had some concern that if there were concerns about Take Back Our Freedoms and you were acting on behalf of Mr. Peckford in that other litigation, that you were in a conflict of interest position?
That was never raised at any time. I don't feel I was in a conflict because at no time did Mr. Peckford ever ask of anything of me. I was the only one who asked of things from him. The concerns that you're referring to are concerns that were never aired at any time during Ottawa by Mr. Eros, and only some months later after the Ottawa protest had concluded.
Okay, thank you. And just to shift a little bit here, you were staying at the Ark Hotel, is that?
No.
Where were you staying?
At a Best Western, I believe it was about a 20-minute drive towards the east.
So you arrived there, excuse me, on February...
So 20-minute drive from downtown. So
Right.
each day it took us 20 minutes to get into the downtown core.
And so you arrived there on, did you stay there the night of February 2nd?
That's correct.
And when did you leave?
Our stay there ended, it would have been approximately around the Sunday of, just trying to visualize a calendar here. The second Sunday would have been, anyway, I think we stayed there for about 10 days.
And then where did you go?
Then we went to the Swiss Hotel.
And how long did you stay there?
We stayed there until the Wednesday, which would have been the 16th. It was on the Wednesday that it was apparent. This was when we I had had the phone call from Steve Kay, the city manager, advising me that the third attempt to move trucks was going to be unsuccessful, and he was very disappointed, as he himself testified here.
Okay, and I was just asking you the date, sir. And,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to contextualize things, and I have to remember things by events because I wasn't calendar focused. And so it was that day that it became apparent that something dramatic was about to happen by the government and the police. And as a result, Ms. Leach instructed Ms. Chipiak and I, because we were the only two lawyers left on the ground at that point, to relocate to a new hotel,
and where was that?
La Germaine.
And how long did you stay there?
I stayed there until the Sunday, which would be the 20th or the 21st, I believe.
And then did you go back to Edmonton?
I went home, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, did you have interaction during the period you were there with James Bowder?
No. And if I did, it might have been where I was in a room or in a hallway or on a sidewalk and he shook my hand, but I met so many people.
Okay.
The interaction would have been unremarkable.
And you became aware of his, or Canada Unity's Memorandum of Understanding?
Yeah, very early on, I was approached by many people, both within the client group and others, asking me about it.
And I believe, is it fair to say it was, in your, from your perception, getting a lot of attention, and you talked to a lot of people about it?
Yeah, they would ask me. I didn't make it a topic that I felt I needed to discuss with others, but I did get asked it a lot. And what the first thing that's obvious about it is a memorandum of understanding in its simplest legal concept requires all parties to it to sign. And it was evident that the signature lines on the last page were not going to be signed by the Governor General, nor someone from the Senate. And in any event, I would explain, when I was asked by the board to brief them on it, I explained, and I apologize for my voice, I'm recovering from a cold.
There's water there if you need it.
Yeah, thank you. That I explained that there's only two ways that governments change under our parliamentary system. The first is when the Prime Minister contacts the Governor General and dissolves Parliament and asks that the writ be dropped. The second, through parliamentary tradition, is where a bill is identified as a confidence vote and Parliament votes to defeat the bill. In that second instance, the Prime Minister would similarly contact the Governor General. This idea that a certain number of people could sign a document and that would somehow compel or incentivize and lead to a change in government, I explained consistently and repeatedly, is legal nonsense.
And you knew that, did you know at the time that almost somewhere around 300,000 people had signed on to a petition regarding that?
I didn't know the number. I knew that it pre-existed the convoy. I knew that Canada Unity pre-existed the convoy as a group by at least a year or two, that it was not a creation of the convoy. It was one of these hanger-ons.
So I take it you were surprised that so many people were taking it seriously. Is that fair to say?
I am very surprised at, this is not the first time I've run into this. I've had to litigate opposite the sovereign citizen folks and quoting admiralty law and think that if they present a flag in a certain way in a court, the judge loses jurisdiction. I've had to encounter this many, many times in my career. So I was just like, here's another one.
Okay, now, on February 4th, I understand you were served with a statement of claim and an injunction motion by Mr. Champ,
That's correct.
and you represented the convoy leaders in that matter?
Yeah, not everyone who was named at that time is my memory. That pleading has been amended a number of times and is a evolving document, is to be expected in a litigation of that nature.
And did you oppose the injunction?
What we did was we received it at approximately 4 o'clock. That was at the same time that we also received notification publicly that GoFundMe had determined that we had a lot going on. We were served with a motion record, emergency motion returnable the Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. So my legal team and I prepared through the night. Mr. Champ continued to provide supplemental materials in the magnitude of hundreds of pages. We had everything ready to go by noonish the next day, but not even enough time for me to read the factum. So I took the...
Did you oppose the motion?
I'm answering your question, sir. We took the position that it was just improper for the court to hear it on the Saturday. We agreed to come back on the Monday. I had informed my clients that there is no way the court was not going to grant the injunction, and that the best we could do was to ensure that the terms of the injunction order were not excessive, were not prone to abuse and arbitrariness, and had an acknowledgement of their right to protest. So the real argument before the court was, what is the terms of the order going to be, and overcoming the challenge of in rem versus in personam orders.
Thank you. Now, around that same time, I understand from your witness statement that you had some discussions with Mr. Marazzo about his concerns that there seemed to be a change in tone in the response of the Ontario Police Service to the protesters.
Yeah, the Ottawa Police Service, that's correct.
And that change in tone was related to what Mr. Marazzo saw as a shift from a negotiation type response to a surge and contain enforcement type response. Is that right?
Precise.
And was that consistent with your view?
Yeah, and we had, to the extent we had the opportunity, because as you can appreciate, it was a very, very fast-moving, chaotic environment with so many either interpersonal issues arising between the players or logistical issues or whatever. But we did have occasion when we were, Ms. Chipiak and I were leaving our hotel, we worked, it must have been the Monday when we were in court, because we ran those from our hotel outside of downtown. And we heard Ms. Deans in an interview on CBC's As It Happens. And her language was deeply troubling. And that combined with Mr. Marazzo expressing concerns about the change in tone from Chief Slowly, it heightened the urgency of trying to find a way to open up dialogue. And I had, if you look at my phone records, you'll see that my first attempt to bring in Mr. French occurred actually that weekend.
Okay. And what was your strategy as a result of this?
Well, in my past, I've been involved in 2 international scope crises. The first was the 2003 mad cow disease outbreak in Alberta, where I was representing a government agency. And the second was in 2009 H1N1, where I represented the people who were patient 0 for the zootonic transmutation. And so I've been in emergency operations centers of government on 2 major incidences, and I've seen the chaos that occurs in there. And, I know the importance of dialogue and communication, and I know I sense the danger of the parties not talking, even if it's back channel. So I had a strong desire to open up back channel communications so we could bring the temperature down, start to see if there's ways to resolve this, de-escalate this, wind this thing down. So that was a heavy focus of mine at all times.
Okay, and I take it that you contacted Mr. Peckford and asked him if he had any contacts that might help?
Yes.
And then you received a call from Dean French.
That's correct.
And in your statement, you indicate that Mr. French suggested that what was needed was to move trucks out of the residential areas. Is that right?
Yeah, he laid down some ground rules, sort of base conditions for his willingness to get involved and try and be an intermediary. And so I still remember, and Eva Chipiuk's reminded me of it, that we had a very, very intense phone call where he was testing me and I was testing him. But what he made absolutely clear was that the truckers had to be willing to move out of the residential areas, and I had to be honest with him about whether I thought that was achievable. And once he learned to trust me and I learned to trust him, we both thought it was achievable. So then he proceeded to go to work.
To which?
To go to work on it, go behind the scenes. And I wasn't asking for the details. That's not how it works. If you've ever done this before, you just let them go do their thing behind the scenes and they will come back to you at the appropriate time.
And on February 8th, I understand that Mr. Marazzo asked if you and Ms. Chipiuk would come to a meeting at City Hall.
Yeah, what had happened was I first met Mr. Marazzo on the Thursday that we had the press conference. It was later in the day that I was introduced to him. It's the first time I had met him. I immediately was impressed with his calmness and his level-headedness. There was a lot of emotion up and down with various individuals in these rooms, but Tom was always just completely calm. And he had been observing for longer than us. And he had been working with the police liaisons and felt that he was in a circle where nothing material was arising. And he advised in the meeting room, I remember he came in, he'd left a meeting with the PLTs and had told them that he didn't want to speak with them anymore and he needed somebody that was more of an inspector level, somebody who had some actual decision-making capability and greater authority. Things went quiet. The next morning, this would be now the Tuesday.
February 8th?
Correct. Tom told Ms. Chipiuk and I that he wanted us to come to a meeting at City Hall at noon. And I said, okay, what's this all about? And does the city know we're coming? Because one thing that is a certainty of lawyer will of any experience will share with you is that it's always a bad idea for your client to unexpectedly bring lawyers to meetings. It never goes well. So I've never before consented to that in my 27 years. But this being such an unusual circumstance, I agreed that we would go. And we arrived at City Hall and had quite an interesting interaction in order to get upstairs to meet with Steve Kay.
Okay, and I take it that you met with the PLT officers and they weren't very happy about your being there, is that right?
Animatedly angry.
And so, as you indicate in your statement, you told them that, to try and cool things down, that you would seek instructions not to impose the continuation of the injunction, which was coming up in court.
That's correct. The only thing you go through your pockets and see, what do I have? And I had nothing. And Eva, Ms. Chipiuk, as astute as she is, pointed out that there was one thing that we did control, and that was what recommendation we could make to the board about what position they would take on the continuation of the injunction, because Justice McLean had issued it for a set number of days. I can't remember the number of days, but it was only set, and we had a returnable date that was coming up in the following, later that week, I believe. You can figure it out from the pleadings. So we said that we would seek instructions from our client not to oppose it becoming a long-term injunction. So the quiet that had resulted from the injunction would remain, and that was what we offered.
Had it been your instructions to oppose the continuation of that injunction?
I had not yet received instructions at that point.
And I take it that you ultimately had the meeting with Mr. Kanellakis?
Yes.
And were you here for his testimony?
Yes.
And is there anything about what he testified to regarding the meeting that you disagree with?
There was a couple of sort of nuanced details, but that I think he might have just been misremembering, at least, or alternatively I am, but nothing of substance.
Okay, and subsequent to that meeting, or sorry, let me take a step back.
Sure.
I understand that he had two concerns. One was to keep the meeting secret because he didn't want it to get out if there wasn't a successful negotiation. And he wanted to move trucks from the residential area and the Rideau-Sussex intersection.
Yeah, he'd given us a list of 3. So I led by saying, once Eva and I went into the room, and I know there was some conflicting testimony, there was 3 PLTs in that room. There was 7 people in that room. I know someone testified, I think it was one of the, it might have been Drummond, that there was no police in the room. That is absolutely false. And he's likely just wasn't accurately briefed, I suspect. And I led by saying, okay, give us your top 3. If we can get movement at 3 locations in the downtown, if we can move trucks and protesters, where can we provide the most immediate and effective relief? And they gave us the 3 locations, and one of them was Kent, and I can't recall the other 2. But what I also picked up on, as did Tom Marazzo and Eva Chipiuk, is that they spent almost the entirety of the time talking about Rideau and Sussex. And so even though we had this list, it was clear to me and to us as a team that Rideau and Sussex